Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I'm not normally playing with plants in the kitchen this early in the day, but I want to get on with this. This is the one we took the kikis off in a recent video. It's Dendrobium findleyanum. Now I just had a look at my records. I got this plant in April 2014 as a very young plant. This sort of young. I think it had these couple of canes, and that's all it was. And first year it grew some canes, and I was quite pleased. Last year it grew some good canes, which I was expecting to bloom, but it's a drier winter rest type, bright light, cool temperatures and all that. And the winter just gone was the first time I attempted to do that with some of the orchids. Now, as a result of that winter rest, these canes desiccated quite badly. These were big, fat, plump, no crease type bulbous sections on this plant. Now, this may be a natural process, but as that's the first time I've rested it, I don't really know. But that's what happened anyway, and it didn't bloom. I thought it was going to. It had some nice new growths poking out from the right place and everything, and they turned into kikis. Now that could be as a result of the winter rest not being truly effective, because it was just too short. And by the time the plant had established that it was resting, spring came. The temperatures started to climb and the days got longer, so its rest was ended prematurely. And since then it's not been doing that well. Well, we've got two inherent problems. First of all, there's only a tiny little bit of moss on that mount. The amount of roots that are in it compared with the root system is negligible. So if that moss is broken down, tough. I'm not disturbing the plant. Far too many of the new roots are actually attached. But where they're attached, they're now bare rooted. And that's not doing the plant any good this year. The new growths are not that strong. There are some, it is growing, but it's not hydrating. And that's my analysis of why it's not growing as well this year. So, as you know from the previous video, I brought some live moss home yesterday. Now, a word about live moss compared with the stuff I normally use, which is well dead. If you use that dead, New Zealand premium sphagnum moss from Bees Grow, if you use that sort of thing, it is dead. It's long since ceased to be. But as such, although it's an organic media, it's inert. It is not alive. Now, in my experience and in my grow room with the high humidity and everything like that, that moss does go green, but it's not coming back to life. I know some people think it's zombie moss, and it can come back to life, and maybe in rare occurrences it does, but under normal circumstances it gets algae on it because it's moist. And so it goes green, and it looks nicer when it goes green rather than the brown colour that you get it. So it looks quite nice, but it does break down. That's its downside. It doesn't last forever, it breaks down. Now, in theory, live moss, providing you keep it alive, does actually last forever. But the downside of live moss is it does not like fertiliser. So you can kill it quite easily by trying to feed your orchid, and you end up feeding the moss as well. So there's got to be a happy balance there. And I think, from my point of view, the balance is just simply feeding much lower strengths but more often, and see if the moss will put up with it, basically. But all I'm actually going to do, I'm not going to unmount this, it's staying exactly where it is, but I need these roots to hydrate themselves. I soak this plant, and the roots stay white, and they're not taking that greenness. Some of the older ones do. In round here where there's a little bit of moss, they do go green when I wet it, but most of these don't, which means the majority of this root system is not hydrating the plant anymore. That to me probably explains why the new canes this year are a bit weaker. So all I'm going to do is wrap some of that live moss around the outside. Now there's two reasons why I'm putting it round the outside and not unmounting it and putting any moss underneath. This has got to have a much drier winter rest. Well, what's that going to do to the live moss when it dries out and stays dry for quite a while? It's probably going to kill it, isn't it? So this effectively is a temporary measure. Wringing wet moss, ow, with pine needles in it. Right, we've established they are pine needles because one of them just stuck in my finger, so I'm going to try and get some of those out. It's not essential, they won't do any harm. But as most of them are on the surface, they will pick off. There's bits of stick in here and all sorts. I don't know where this moss came from. I don't know whether somebody collected it. I mean, sphagnum moss in this country is very strange. There are some critically endangered species of sphagnum, and basically they are that way because they grew in very precise conditions, and you know, the more people there are on the planet, the more the need for housing and roads and jobs and so on, and the effect of that on the ecosystems is that lots of places where this stuff used to live quite happily on its own have now been drained and used for other purposes, so the land is no longer suitable, and so a lot of them are dying out. But some of the sphagnum, like some of the stuff I'm about to go and collect, I hope, maybe not today, is common as muck. It's not endangered, there's nothing wrong with, you know, with its stability in the wild. It's fine, and as such I know a couple of places where it grows like a weed along grassy banks along the side of the road, and it's everywhere. So a couple of handfuls going missing is not going to do any harm. You still have to say to yourself, if you think along those lines, what if everybody did it? Well, everybody doesn't do it. It's sphagnum moss, and it doesn't have that many uses. Not to the extent that people would deplete that type of sphagnum in the moss. It just couldn't happen. I mean, I know some boggy areas where the stuff grows and makes huge big flat platforms over pits of water. I've had reasons to be out in those boggy areas with my cameras and things. They're dangerous places. Some of those pits are 6 foot deep, and they look lovely and green and lush with all the sphagnum on the top. You put your foot in there, you go down fast, straight through the platform on the top, because although it looks solid, it's not. So then they're iffy places to be wandering around in. So all I'm going to do with this is wrap some around, and as a consequence of wrapping it round the outside, come the time when I want to rest this plant, I can just take it off, because it's only sat on the surface. Its only purpose is to hydrate these roots. That's all I'm putting it on there for. I'm going to have fun tying this on, because it's, as you can see, it's little pieces. Let's see if I can get some more of these pine needles out. Mainly because as I hold on to it, they're sticking in my hand, and they are quite sharp. Not too much of a big deal for my gnarly old hands, but yeah, I think that's probably enough. Now all I've got to do is try and tie it on. That's the fun bit. But this is not a perfection job. All I need is for some moss to be round that plant and for it to stay hydrated. And then hopefully those new growths will push on at a rate of knots. And this doesn't have to be tied on tight. The only reason the moss is there is to hydrate those roots. It's not for the plant to live in, if you know what I mean. It's more the other way round. The moss is going to live on the plant. But I will have to watch my feeding levels. But I mean, my principle this year is, last year I fed heavily. You know, I use the expression often enough, feed and water well in the growing season. Well, this year we are watering well but we are feeding less strength but more often. So subtly different. Plants still get a flush, which I believe is necessary, but they don't get that strong a feed this year, and they certainly don't get it as often as they used to. Now the fact that I'm not this is impossible. Right, so let's just get a loop round somewhere near it, and then we'll start winding round and just loosely attach that moss. Can't see what I'm doing actually, but the fact that I can go round many times if my loop isn't quite in the right place, it's adjustable. Right, you're supposed to be on top of the roots. Right, well, that's got a basis. Now all I've got to do is wrap round a few times, I think, probably quite a few times in this case. And I can't see what's going on at the front of the plant at the moment. I'm concentrating on the back of the plant. Now let's no, I need a couple more round. I'm hoping that what I'm doing round the front of the plant is okay, because I can't see, but I'm just making sure that everything round the back is in the right place and the moss isn't burying any new growths. Now I can turn it over and see what I'm doing. Oh, that doesn't look too bad, does it? Yeah, I'm happy with that. All the new growths, bar that little one, which I can tease out, are not buried in the moss, and the moss is on there, good enough to stay. As I say, this is a short-term effort really, it's not long-term. I'd like to be able to get that top bit of moss tied on. Let's see if I can put a diagonal up across that bit. Yep, that'll do it. Right, that's good enough. That's all I was after, was just a way of hydrating these roots. And obviously the moss will stay damp quite a long time. So it should work. It buried me tag, but with the shape of these canes there is only one. So I'm not going to forget what the hell it is, am I? Right, so that's it. Now this plant would do better higher up the mount, because the roots do all virtually point downwards. There's a couple climbing up, but most of them have gone down. So if the plant was another couple of inches higher, the roots would be mainly on the mount. But these few that are hanging out the bottom are not a big deal. They will get more water now, because when I water this moss, it'll get dripping wet, literally dripping, and all of that drippy water, the excess water, will drain down to the bottom and run down these roots for a while, possibly enough to hydrate them. But that's what I wanted to do. Most of those aerial roots and those on the back of the mount are now in moss. Let's hope the moss stays alive, shall we? See no reason why it shouldn't. It's alive now. If you've got live sphagnum moss, if you have a look at Brad's channel, he's just done a video on sphagnum moss. But bear in mind what he just showed you. He just showed you is outdoor sphagnum moss, and that's where it lives, outdoors. Right through the winter, it freezes solid, gets covered in 2 foot of snow, but that's where it lives because it's that type of sphagnum moss. He has lots of different types of sphagnum moss in his greenhouse, which grow really well. Some's a reddy colour. There's some gorgeous varieties of sphagnum moss, but they don't seem to cross over. As he said in his video, that lovely moss that he's got growing outside, that's nice and healthy and green, and if he takes any of that in his greenhouse, it just dies. It doesn't like it, and he doesn't know why. The fact that it doesn't like it just says, well, don't do it then. But he does grow a lot in the greenhouse, which obviously does like it. So there's different types of sphagnum. The stuff that I'm going to get is outdoor stuff. That's where it lives, that's what it's used to. I will have to experiment. Once I get it going, I can see it growing well outside. I'll try bringing some bits in and see if it still lives. It may or may not. I don't know yet. Anyway, that's just a quick video with me sorting out some hydration for a plant that wasn't really getting much. And hopefully it'll do better now. And then we'll see what happens. I've got a horrible feeling that because the new growths on here are late and not what I would call strong yet, we're halfway through the growing season, and that's what they've done so far. Now last year they were much bigger than that at this time of year. So this may not get rested this year. It might have to just lump it on the grounds that there's no point in trying to rest a plant with weak canes. They're not going to do well as a consequence. And if these canes were capable of blooming, I might lose that capability by not resting it properly. But some of my dendrobiums that are supposed to have that winter rest have actually bloomed without it. And it's literally one species at a time, you know. There are those that I rested that bloomed well. Well, would they have bloomed anyway if they'd stayed in the grown room and not gone up in the bedroom? I don't know. But the fact that they bloomed well, having had a partial winter rest up in the cold bedroom, that's what they'll get again, because it worked. But I don't know. They may have worked just as well left in the grow room. And some that have always stayed in the grow room and never been rested bloom as well. Some don't. So I'm still playing with these. Anyway, that's that one done. That should stay there. It's held on in enough places to not get watered off every time I pour water on it. But most of the things are getting watered with a sprayer at the moment. That's working well for me. But I can only work like that while the weather's hot, and I know that plants are going to dry off and any drips that go all over the place don't matter. Once it cools down a bit and the duller weather comes back again, which it always does in the UK, that option goes away. I'm not having plants getting dripped on and wet when the temperatures are lower. So it's a temporary methodology that seems to be working okay. It's quite fun really, splashing around with the sprayer. Anyway, that's that one done. Thanks for dropping by. See you next time.